Hey, greetings to my dear 900 to 1000 cohort in the ChessDojo training program. Hope you all are doing great and are ready to see and master a real exciting game. One of the more exciting games in chess history, a game that's been passed down to us for 170 years by now, and every generation has delighted in it pretty much. This is your game to memorize. So my intention here is to explain this game to you in a way that will help you both learn from it and memorize it. This game was played by Adolf Anderssen against Lionel Kieseritzky. Anderssen, widely regarded as the best chess player in the world, right before Morphy. There's no clear, rankings or anything. He's not. I've never really heard people talk about him as, an unofficial world champion or anything like that. But I think he was, let's say, Morphy's greatest hurdle towards proving his supremacy and all that. So, yeah, let's get into this game. It is a King's Gambit, which was a popular opening at the time, and this game is full swashbuckling style. It's exactly what people may stereotypically think of when they think of the Romantic period of chess, where people had to sacrifice material, and it was even considered sort of ungentlemanly. That tells you what who was playing the game, right? Not poor females, but it was considered ungentlemanly to not accept a sacrifice even. So, you had to play with verve and pizzazz and all this kind of stuff. You had to not just try and win or lose your games, but maintain a certain ideal or whatever. This game is played absolutely in that style. It's not absolutely the only style that Anderssen could play in. And you can find some games of Adolf Anderssen's plenty where he plays knight f3 on move 2, which has been considered more sane since 1900. But here we get a King's Gambit. So this is going to be our first point that I'm going to tell you something about. What's the idea here in playing the King's Gambit? The idea is to distract this pawn from the center, very much like the Queen's Gambit in chess, which happens on the other side of the board and is perhaps the most played opening in the entire history of chess, the Queen's Gambit. The King's Gambit has a similar idea. The idea is to gain central control. The idea is not to play like a crazy person or to come running out with your king or to sacrifice a ton of material. Not necessarily, though. You'll find that most King's Gambit players are willing to sacrifice material or run their king out somewhere pretty wacky if it helps them control the center. But you have to understand that what the King's Gambit player is valuing here, and the reason why anyone is a King's Gambit player, is it's somebody who values pawn control of the center and controlling the center by actually occupying it with pawns, because there's different ways to try to control the center. Notice that this move doesn't help White's development unless you count, new avenues for the king, which nobody does. So this move is not a move which is valuing development. It's not a move played to attack. A lot of people have noticed that in King's Gambit, sometimes White plays bishop c4 and attacks Black on f7 with some kind of lightning attack. That only happens if Black gets carried away and trying to munch and munch and munch as much stuff as they can. But if you just keep your eyes on this position on move 2 instead of flights of fantasy looking ahead and thinking about what's happened in other evocative games like this Immortal Game here, you'll notice that White is not advancing their development. In fact, at this point, they're getting behind in development. And people who really value development are going to answer with moves like d5, wild counterattacking, still leaving all the pawns sacrificed. But this is a move played by somebody who wants to bring out all their pieces really quickly. That is a move that values development, right? The f4 move from White, this specifically values pawn control of the center. White's willing to give up time, king safety, maybe even other things in order to try to distract one of the opponent's pawns from the center. So Black took, and Anderssen played bishop c4, the bishop's gambit. Note that when Black plays ef4, that means basically equal on development, right? Black didn't ignore White's pawn takes pawn kind of tension to say, hey, let me just bring out pieces or break in the center, right? So development's equal again. White now develops a piece finally. The more common way to play the King's Gambit nowadays is knight f3. Many people consider this move basically obligatory once you don't have an f-pawn. And the reason is exactly what happens in this game, which is that the white king gets checked, and it's just really, really awkward. A famous tactical pattern, which it would be nice for you guys to know, is why blocking with the pawn is bad. So let's briefly digress down this variation g3, although in the game, Anderssen plays king f1, and this would have still been opening theory for these players. This would have been very, very common knowledge even back then for players that in the bishop's gambit, you're allowing the check, and your plan is that your king gets displaced, but later you recover time with knight f3, attacking the queen. And we'll see in the game how that kind of works. But the idea was it's okay. You move your king once, but your opponent just sort of moves their queen a couple times, and it's all right. But here's why g3 doesn't really work here. Pawn takes pawn. Removing it. The queen's still trying to open this diagonal to mess with white's king. If you played pawn takes pawn, black has a luscious choice between picking up a free rook, absolutely free. In fact, black will have a rook and an extra pawn, and you'll be threatening a knight and threatening a pawn. So you'll be taking tons of material while making threats, or you could just keep chasing the king with queen g3, and of course, black's doing well also. Now, here's a tricky move, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, is after you lose the pawn, you take that one moment where you're not in check from the queen, and you counterattack her with the knight. And here, there's a beautiful tactical pattern, which is that you just leave the queen there. You play g2 check. That's check from the queen on purpose. You sacrifice your queen. The opponent takes your queen, which is more or less, well, I mean, they don't have any good alternatives to that. And then you take this rook here and make a new queen with check. Now, do you know how much material you've gained or lost during this sequence? Can you keep track of whether we've gotten ahead or behind? Like, are we winning material? Are we sacking material for an attack? What's going on? The correct answer is that we've come out ahead by one rook from the black perspective, or from the white perspective, we've lost a rook. Okay, because in this line, white's taking a queen, but black's taking a rook and getting the queen back. So black got a rook and a queen out of the deal. White got a queen. And you could say that black's pawn disappeared and black lost a pawn, but black also captured that pawn on g3 moments before. So in this situation here, you'll see that black is again ahead a rook and a pawn from the King's Gambit. And of course, white's in check and there's more stuff hanging. In fact, white has basically undeveloped things and hanging things. Only two categories of things. So this is a good tactic to know, that knight f3, sometimes it'll work. Sometimes you'll chase the queen back and then you'll clean up whatever pieces on g3 and things will work out. You got to really be careful that there isn't this pawn check followed by taking a rook, making a new queen, etc. deal. That'll pretty much knock you out if you walk into that in a game. Okay, so in the game, Anderssen moves the king out of the way. And now Kieseritzky plays a move which would be really weird nowadays and was not that weird back then. In fact, b5 is played in a different opening in Anderssen's second most famous, or second, not less famous, but equal of two most famous games, being that one's called the Evergreen game. This one is Immortal, that one's Evergreen. Yeah, it could be hard just to remember which one's which. But the same move was played in that other game. And again, the idea is that white will spend one move capturing your pawn, and you can get this bishop out one move faster, which would be a whole lot better idea if Kieseritzky had ever moved his bishop this game. But he never does. It sits on c8 for the whole game. So this b5 move remains, sort of a weird counter gambit, but it was in the spirit of the times, right? To show that you were a genius. I think a lot of people didn't realize that having more or less pawns even really had any bearing on winning or losing the game. Of course, Philidor had already figured that out, 100 years before these fools. But, people had still not understood Philidor's theories by this point. Perhaps Steinitz, perhaps Morphy, perhaps Steinitz was the first person whose games suggest to me that they had, progressed beyond Philidor and including understanding him. So b5 gets played, the pawn gets sacked, the pawn gets taken. Of course, there's an alternative here for white, which is to collect your tempo right away with knight f3, with the bishop still hanging. Now, sometimes you want to be careful. Sometimes you want to play with fire. Sometimes you want to be careful about playing with fire. When you counterattack the queen, leaving your bishop hanging, it's possible that she responds with some move, and then you've got two things hanging instead of one, right? And you say, oh man, I shouldn't have been so super clever. But it's also always good to remember that you don't have to respond to every one of your opponent's threats. You can use your own threats. You can use initiative. You can sort of push the game and try and bend it towards your will. I think had Anderssen played knight f3, this queen might have come to h5 defending the pawn. And then as white, I would probably play bishop d5 or b3. Either move is fine. But the idea is you don't actually have to take this pawn to have a good position for white. This position would be acceptable with, two pieces developed for white and black having this weird random pawn out here. Of course, it's partly achieved its goal since black can play bishop b7, but you're not obligated to take it. I don't know for sure whether Anderssen bought into that whole idea that you're honor bound to take stuff when it's given to you, but he took it. And now knight f6 is played, which is a good-looking developing move, but a little bit awkward in that the queen is now kind of sealed into a weird part of the board. I mean, they were a long ways away from knowing that the best position for a queen in the opening is in one of these sort of modest central positions that I'm highlighting in red just from white's perspective here. These squares from which she can quickly get to the queen side or king side or stay in the center. From here, she has really great scope and maneuverability. So, but anyway, the queen gets stuck in a weird spot by knight f6, but knight f6 attacks this center pawn and develops a piece. And, from that perspective, it's perfectly reasonable. And another thing about this game is that may help you to remember it is black's not really going to use these pieces. they're not really going to use this piece. They're barely going to use this one. So the knight and queen are going to fight this here for a couple moves in a weird exchange. So knight f6 comes here, attacks this pawn. White cashes in the tempo on the queen with knight f3, and the queen goes to h6. Alternative move would have been to put the queen on h5, winning back that tempo, right? And then white needs to spend a move on the bishop. I would do so by developing a new piece rather than by spending time running away with the bishop. This was an alternative for black, not necessarily particularly better or worse. Yeah, black chose queen h6. From here, the queen defends the pawn, but this is basically committal because when white's d-pawn moves, which it did on this very move, you get this lineup between the bishop and the queen. And if black successfully defends f4 and locks the bishop in on c1, then you could say the queen's placement on h5 is brilliant. But if white ends up playing bishop takes f4 at some point or breaking through that diagonal with the bishop, then we will say the black's queen placement was abysmal, right? And obliging to white because, you're just giving up more and more tempi, right? So you sort of, when you put the queen on h6, you really need your strategy to succeed or you're going to get pushed back in the way you'll see Kieseritzky get pushed back this game. Like once white starts pushing him back, it's pretty brutal. And you can just sort of feel the strength and power that white has and black doesn't at that point. But let's stop here for a second after queen h6 and look at this move d3. Most King's Gambit players try to play d4 in one move in the opening. And I'm a pretty average King's Gambit player myself, and I would also be aiming to play d4 in one move in this position. Now, why didn't white play d4, opening up the bishop towards the queen and the pawn? Presumably, white didn't want to let black play knight takes e4. Now, as your center pawn, and it introduces a threat of knight g3 check, which is relevant to this game, so folks should be aware that knight g3 is an important threat for black in these positions. I think even this would have been quite interesting and complicated because white has the move queen e2 stopping knight g3. So d4 might have been playable right here. But when I just look over this game, the move that I would play, the 2-second simple default move that I would suggest that a lot of, newer King's Gambit players might want to at least have pop up at the top of their candidate move list would be knight c3. Now, why do I think knight c3 is sort of like the simple move to look at? Because knight c3 defends all your stuff. Not only the stuff that your opponent's attacking, but all your stuff. Of course, I don't want to teach you all to become extremely passive, extremely safe defensive players. I leave a lot of stuff hanging at times. But when there's no really strong reason to hang your stuff versus defend it, on balance, having all your stuff defended tends to be a good thing. Okay, so after knight c3, our bishop's defended, our pawn's defended. It just means stuff can't go as wrong when we don't have just hanging pieces all over the place. And look at this. It's a pristine developing move. The knight's going to a really good square. You can play d4 next move probably, or d3 or something else if you want. I think it's a really pristine, clean move. And I doubt that Anderssen's d3 move is better, but that's what he played. He played d3, defending this pawn, trying to lock the knight out and opening up the bishop. I can't really think of an advantage of this over knight c3, but it's what he did. Okay. Now, in this position, and this is one of the really hard tasks for you in memorizing this game, is that the opening is really off-kilter, unusual, and bizarre. So, good luck with the memorization task. I'm going to help you the best I can with it. It may take a few times to really get it. But Kieseritzky in this position says that his, one move experiment with developing pieces is over, right? He played knight f6. He's done with that. It's back to weird pseudo attacking moves. Reasonable moves for black in this position would be knight c6, bishop b7, bishop c5, those kind of moves, right? Black goes knight h5. And from our previous variation about knight takes e4, can anyone see a tactical threat for black after knight h5? Like, if you were trying to remember the game and you're playing through the moves and you're like, what did black do here? Knight h5. What was knight h5 about? I know black played knight h5 at some point in the game. Why did they play it? When did they play it? What's it about? The answer is knight g3 check. So I'm going to play a passing move for white to show you black's threat. That's not a good move. Don't remember that move. Knight g3 check. I just want to put it on the board and let you see it. It attacks the king and the rook, and if pawn takes knight, then queen h1 check. Black wins a little bit of material, and it's kind of unfortunate for white, who probably has to retreat the knight from f3 to avoid, the queen being captured or further rampages, right? So if you sack your rook and you have to undevelop your knight, you're not getting the kind of boost and initiative that you want out of a sacrifice. So this knight g3 would actually be a legit threat. It seems very artificial for black to go fishing for material like this, to me, without developing pieces. But I think if you just simply let black check and take your rook, they might be able to get away with it. Certainly if we're playing this, backwards knight to g1 move, that wouldn't be the way to make this work for white. Okay? So, how can white stop knight g3? Well, there's surprisingly few good moves to stop it. And the reason is that the main reason is that king f2 and king g1 don't work here. If you were just playing an ideal move and you saw the knight g3 threat and you thought, okay, I have to do something about it, the ideal move would be king e1 with the plan of rook f1 or rook e1 and then tucking your king. because you're dealing with your opponent's threat and you're doing the things you want to do, right? Whenever you have to answer your opponent's threats, you want to at least do it with something that's building towards your own goals for the game, which would be to get this rook out of being stuck by the king. But neither of these king f2 or king g1 moves can be played because of queen b6 check. And this is why you don't want your stuff to just be hanging if you've got the choice. It would be nicer to have a knight on c3. Okay? So, for example, if knight c3 had been played instead of d3, as I would have played, right? Then, after knight h5, black's really doing nothing. We can play king f2 laughing at this move against bishop c5 or queen b6, either move. We can play d4 in one move, right? And we are supremely unbothered by every one of black's moves. In fact, they all just look silly, like they're moving here and there with two random scattered pieces, no cohesion, and it's like white knows how to play chess and black doesn't, if you look at this position. So d3, knight h5, there's not that many ways to stop knight to g3. Certainly not like beautiful ways with moves that you want to play. So Anderssen plays a very weird looking move. And one thing that you have to say for how Anderssen plays in this game is that Anderssen plays a lot of moves that are very creative, moves that you or I or many other chess players would never think of. I think some people, and chat confirms this for me, I think some people might think of the best move in this position, which is rook to g1, avoiding knight to g3. But I think very few people would think that the answer to these threats along the h-file would be to put another piece hanging on the h-file. Come on, Anderssen, what are you doing? How does your brain work? I want to know. I want to trip inside your head. Spend a day there and understand how you come up with these ideas. Like, where does this move come from? Well, it's an amazing move. It may not be as good as rook g1, but it's an amazing move. Concretely, the idea is, if you go knight g3, then the rook defends the knight. He actually wants to come to f5. And let's just say that black pushed the knight to f5. Then you'll find that weirdly against knight g3, he can take from f5, and again, he's dealing with it, right? So, and not only that, but if we did something other than g5, like say we developed a piece, it gets even worse. Knight takes knight. You can't take the rook. You can't even take the knight because of the bishop. So that's the situation. He puts his knight on h4, and even though the knight's hanging to the queen, black doesn't have any brilliant move with this knight. And he stopped the knight to g3 threat. If this were a modern-day grandmaster game, it might end with knight f6 threatening the knight f3, knight h5 threatening knight g3 check, knight h4 stopping it. Handshakes, $10,000 to everybody, 0.3 rating points gained by one of the players. Handshakes all around, blah, 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 blah. Okay. But now, but seriously speaking, if black retreated, I think white has a pretty strong move in g3, supporting the knight and fighting over this. And I don't think the game's going in black's direction, who just moved this knight back and forth twice, and has the queen on a weird spot. So, okay. So knight h4 happens, and Kieseritzky continues to operate with tactics. He goes queen to g5. This is now back to the main game, attacking two pieces. And I want to agree with Opfeshach that knight h4 is the move of a genius. It may or may not be the best move, because I think that here there's this huge question of what Anderssen had in mind in case of g6 from Kieseritzky. And also we could ask the same question here after knight h4. If we want to adopt prophylactic thinking, which didn't yet exist at that time, at least in chess, then g6 would be the move which stops the knight in its tracks on the hanging square and says, what does white intend to do about bishop e7, among other things, right? Like, where's white going from here? Yeah, it's not clear that knight h4 was such a great move, but it was still the move of a genius one way or another, because who else would have thought of it? And he's got some kind of, he's got some idea. It's not just like, oh, he's just blundering stuff, right? I mean, he's got plenty of ideas, and they're ideas that some other people can't think of. So that's original thinking, and that's genius. So after g6 here, I don't even know if he would have played g4 to counterattack this knight, or if he would have played h4, weakening his squares to kick the queen back and not have to lose a bishop, or if he had something else in mind. I mean, or if he was just going to sack something. I can't even guess what his move was, but I guaranteed you he was good enough. He had a plan. He had seen the move g6. That's a very basic move to Anderssen. Some kind of plan involved, and and dude's a genius. Yeah, was he going to go knight d4, bishop g7, and defend the bishop, get attacked from here, then throw in some shiny move that I don't see? I don't know. But g6 certainly would have been the most testing move from Kieseritzky, and here he plays a very sort of feeble, wimply move, c6, attacking the bishop. The point of sacking the b pawn, let's just say, should never be to then put a pawn on c6, blocking in this bishop and doing nothing, right? I know this is the move in the Evans Gambit where you're playing d5, but this is not the Evans Gambit, and black's not playing d5 either. So this b5 Gambit, only to then play c6, if white just retreats the bishop, then what did you play b5 for? You lost a pawn in order to put on a pawn on c6, blocking in your own knight, blocking in your own bishop pretty badly on this side of the board, weakening the d6 square. No, this move here, I think we have to say, is both a wimpy and a dopey move. Okay, and if you want to say, why did Kieseritzky lose this game? This would be the move that I would hone in and focus on, folks. There's two moments, and I'll show you the other one later on. But to me, this is actually, maybe I got 3 moments. Sorry, Lionel. But this move here, to me, it's a very bad move because it's inconsistent with the other moves, as well as being on its surface bad, right? Like blocking the knight, and what are you doing? The worst thing about white's position is that this piece is hanging, right? And you're sort of asking white to fix it. Now, okay, you guys can tell from everything I've said that to me, the obvious move now for Anderssen would be to just retreat the bishop and say, what are you doing? Your position's getting really bad. And honestly, bishop a4 would have been enough. But Anderssen's a genius, and he leaves that bishop hanging there and sacks it. So you guys can just, don't even, when you're trying to remember the game, don't even consider saving the bishop. It just sits there. The story of the bishop is it takes the pawn on b5, eventually gets attacked by c6, hangs out there, lets black take it on b5, and then black can't prevent white from playing knight d5 because they don't have a c-pawn. So that bishop just sits there. He's a goner. You can forget about him. So now what Anderssen does is he starts a surprising, straight up surprising operation on the king side to win the f4 pawn and to start taking over the dark squares. And this is something super deep, and Anderssen may not have understood it in these kind of like broad strategic way himself, but in some kind of concrete way, in some way, he's got to understand something about what he's doing. And this is genius, but the c6 move weakens the dark squares. This is super deep, so I'm sorry for those of you whose minds I'm just going to short circuit and blow out on this point here. But one day it'll sort of percolate and you'll get it and it'll be cool. So I'm just planting a seed for you here. We're only making you really study and learn a couple games, so here you go. Here's this one. He's starting to notice that he can go out. White can start to go after the dark squares. This move weakens dark squares. This knight is outposted on a light square, which means it's striking at dark squares. And so he figures out if he can break this bishop through to f4, right, he's going to start taking over all the dark squares. All right, and watch how this is going to work. It's really weird. Normally when you try and take over the dark squares, you hammer the opponent by putting your pawns onto dark squares. This is a very unusual way to take over. He goes g4. kicking this knight that was defending dark squares off of the square it's on. Notice that pawn takes pawn is unacceptable. So g4 comes in, and one of the things he's offering is a trade of bishop for knight. When you trade your light squared bishop for a knight, that tends to give you more supremacy on dark squares, because you have more pieces left that attack dark squares and less pieces left that attack light squares. So this already has an implicit leaning towards dark square control. Kieseritzky retreats the knight. Now retreating the bishop would not really be logical, because we would have to ask ourselves, why did we make the knight retreat if we were just going to, you know, then sacrifice this pawn, right? So you don't want to just, it's just illogical, right? So to help you remember what happens, you know, once he's playing g4, he's sagging that bishop. It's not going anywhere, and it wouldn't be logical to now save the piece. His plan is this, and this is just terrific. He's taking advantage of the fact of this queen that's been boxed in. She's in a really bad way here, and there are plans to trap her here. And honestly, Kieseritzky should worry more about his queen and less about being up a piece at this point. And there is a move available for black here to fight for the queen's and the knight's life and space. What happens in the next couple moves, and it's not bad to go back and forth a couple moves, is he takes, gets kicked. The queen barely has one space left, right? Because the knight's covering these two squares. And queen f3 threatening bishop f4. The queen has nowhere to run, so the knight has to get out of the way of the queen. But the knight has nowhere to run except back to her starting square. Bishop f4 and retreat. That's what's going to happen in the next 3-4 moves. Can you feel how that's kind of disastrous for black? The knight going to g8, white's bishop coming out, the queen limping around the board. So that's what's going to happen in a second. So look at that position after rook g1. I don't want to give you a long variation about, you know, how a modern grandmaster could defend better than Kieseritzky here with some long, complicated thing. But do you see how bad a thing is about to happen to this queen and knight? And then can you understand at a strategic level that that's so important that, you know, we should consider saving those pieces before we consider capturing that bishop? Is there not some way to make better sense out of these pieces? Like, even if you moved your king to d8 so the knight could go to e8 instead of g8, well, that's not so much better. Maybe d6 so your knight could go to d7 and your queen could go to f6, right? But this whole disaster, it's just too bad, right? So black should be looking in another direction instead of taking the bishop, but does take it. Okay? Now, I showed it to you in super fast motion without explanation, but do you guys remember what comes next from Anderssen? He's going to grab space with the h-pawn, and then he's going to go after the f-pawn. No queen f3 first. This is a good-looking move. It's a good-looking move. Black has no way to defend f4 because bishop to d6 to defend it. There's knight takes bishop check. It's a good-looking move. But he just improves his position first with h4. Queen has to move, h5, queen moves, and then queen f3. And that's just an improvement because this pawn helps against maybe g6, and in some cases could even come to h6 and help fight for that square here. Okay, so notice he takes the maximum tempi and space with the h-pawn and then sets up queen f3. And notice in this position, you know, you could take the pawn on f4, but he wants to do it with that tempo, right? Bring up the queen, take the pawn, kick the queen. Oof, brutal. Now here you can see the queen's about to be trapped, so you can remember this knight had to get out of the way. It did. Bishop came out, queen here, and now white completes development. Very clean, simple move here from white, knight to c3. Well, it doesn't complete development. You know, our rooks aren't that good yet, but it's a good developing move, and it's headed towards an amazing outpost on d5 because black doesn't have c6 or e6 pawns. All right, so he's got knight c3, can come to d5, and it's looking great. Now, look at this position here. Black is currently up a bishop against one pawn for white. That's the material balance. This is a reference position, and I'm going to give you a reference evaluation for it. I think white's winning here. That's not based on long analysis. That's my evaluative function. I look at this position and I say white's position is winning. It's better than what white has is better than black's piece. I see incredibly poor development and not even great prospects to improve that development. And, you know, real trouble getting this pawn engaged, right? Since it's isolated, means white kind of dominates the whole center. And so, so I would recommend to all of you to take this evaluation into account. You don't have to agree with everything I say. You can investigate these things for yourselves. But if you want a reference point, this is an example of a position where someone's down a piece and not making any threats, but winning. So sometimes you'll see games where someone sacrifices a piece, but then every move they're threatening something, right? Like they're checking the king, they're attacking a queen, they're setting up a mate. And you can tell that they have a direct attack, a set of threats that allows them to sort of force through their advantage compared to the piece that they're down. Here, there's no such thing. Although, I mean, knight d5 is... I mean, white's not far from making threats with knight d5, c7, or e5, queen a8. White's not far from making threats, but the position's decisive because of white's sort of positional trumps and development lead, not because of direct threats. And in the game, Kieseritzky plays another offensive move to me, which is bishop c5. I'm going to show you for one moment a better move that Kieseritzky could play, which would be queen c6, getting out of the way of knight d5. That hits the queen. And here we're preparing to bring the knight back into the game, so the queen's getting out of the way of that. Knight d5, threatening knight c7 check. And now knight a6, covering that. So after this pair of moves, you can see that white doesn't have a direct checkmating attack or direct threats here. But the black pieces are so awkward from here. The knight, you know, it's still stuck. It can't get back into the game well. So this is really just an evaluation from me that white is better. It's not a series of calculations or threats. All right, so that's our reference position. Move 16. White brings out the next knight, and it's move 16, and black has no piece other than the queen out. Really miserable. And plays a miserable move in a miserable position, which often happens. I mean, miserable positions breed miserable moves because the people playing them are depressed and don't see any good variations, and it's hard to, you know, dig out from that. But what I don't like about this move is that black's in danger on the dark squares. Right? This knight is attacking all these dark squares. This bishop's attacking the dark squares. This knight is preparing to come to d5, from whence it will also attack the dark squares. And so this bishop, which is important for defending all these weak squares, it's coming out and saying what? That it wants to take on g1, the rook? You probably can't even play that move. It's so bad. Even if you got another move, right? So to me, you know, logical looking moves would be moves like bishop b7, looking to trade the knight when it comes to d5, right? Or this queen c6 move I mentioned for you, preparing to bring this knight out, or knight a6 here. Perfectly logical, controlling some dark squares and developing this piece. Small detail, I'm sorry to tell you this in the wrong order, but e5 from white last move would have been a double attack, but black has a double defense, so this move would not have been decisive and actually would not have been a good move. Do you guys know how Kieseritzky could have gotten out of that double attack? All right, I'm going to give the answer, so if you really want to figure it out for yourself, pause the video real quick. Queen c6 would be the move that saves the queen and blocks this diagonal. Okay. And then, I mean, once you hit that situation, then e5 has just blocked the bishop, and now white has to avoid a queen trade, so white has to spend time retreating their queen or getting out of it, so white loses a lot of their development lead compared to knight c3, right? Beautiful move. Okay, so bishop c5 was played, a bad move, and Anderssen continues brilliantly with knight to d5. Again, There's a more pedantic move that might have been more effective. I mean, it wouldn't have sacked 2 rooks and a queen and made a brilliant game, necessarily. But, you know, when you're playing games, for those of you who want to create an immortal game like an Anderssen versus Kieseritzky game of your own, understand that playing good moves, you can't decide on which day you're going to play the immortal game. You have to play good moves that lay the foundation and understand that there's always the potential that from a good position later on, brilliant moves will flow. So don't go chasing sacking too many pieces too early just because your plan is like, today I'm going to set out, I'm going to do 15 minutes of tactics, I'm going to go running for half an hour, I'm going to come home, and I'm going to play the brilliancy of my life. You can't you can't set it up in that way, okay? So this move here is an obvious looking move to me, just threatening to take the opponent's key dark square bishop with a pawn. I mean, I think black would just have to play bishop back to f8 and you'd get knight d5 and the game would be sort of over. I don't really know what black's supposed to do about it. The point is that once the bishop comes here, now you play knight d5 and they've got an extra hanging piece that the queen's responsible for defending. They've also got knight c7 coming. Like, there is a danger that you win the game too easily here with d4, knight d5, and you don't get to sack all your stuff. But truly, this is a really good move, which would have been stronger than what Anderssen played. It seems really, really obvious to me. It also opens up the threat of bishop e5, right? Like if, I don't know, if they go here to stop knight c7 like we've been talking about, then the move bishop e5 should absolutely bone crunch black. I mean, again, the risk is that the game's going to be over before you get a chance to sacrifice anything. I see you and I feel you about regretting that, but I mean, good moves are good moves, right? Anderssen played the brilliant move knight d5. This game's famous for a double rook sack, so it probably won't be too hard for you guys once you know that that's the story of the game to remember these last couple moves of this game, which is that, you know, he's going to invite the queen in for t with his rooks. Queen takes b2 from Kieseritzky. Well, the queen's attacked, and actually she has to defend g7. She can't go somewhere random, so this is as good a move as is available. And if white now greedily played knight c7 check and takes the rook, then black will get revenge taking white rooks, and black might even be winning if white wasted their time capturing that rook. Because you're spending your time winning 1 rook while the other guy wins 2. That's not, why are we doing that? If we're going to sack our rooks, we better go after something more important than 1 rook, which is the king. So here white plays another beautiful, brilliant move that might also be second best, which is bishop d6, sacking their rooks. It's super brilliant. It might be even better and less brilliant to save the rook to d1 or e1 or something. And then black's position's in such a state of discoordination and undevelopment that it's hard for black to deal with ideas of bishop d6 and knight c7 and e5, etc. So I would think white would be winning. With the brilliant move, I'm not completely sure that white's winning. This is the question, you know. And in the game, Kieseritzky took the rook on g1 first, which seems less committal because it leaves the queen having the option to take the second rook. But for whatever reason, I was thinking that this move here might not be such an obvious loss for black. You take 1 rook with check and then back up, leaving your queen as a really annoying defensive piece. She's doing amazing amounts of work here. The first thought for white as an attacker would be to take this, just completely dominating all dark squares forever, right? Done. But the problem with that move is that after queen check, the king has to go somewhere, right? And then you take this bishop, defending a bunch of dark squares with the queen. And I'm not sure that I see a win for white in that position. Honestly, I'm not sure. If you go knight g7 check, because you lost the bishop that was on d6, c5 diagonal, the king can actually go to f8, threatening your knight, and you, importantly, can't play queen f7. And I'm not sure how to win that position for white. Also in this position here, I mean, we don't have to take the bishop because it can't take us without allowing the queen into f7. So there might be another move for white. I was considering this crazy move, rook c1, defending the check. And the point is that if black takes the second rook, taking the queen off of defending the dark squares, you have check here and dark square checkmate. That's how important our dark square bishop is. And then the other thing I want to show about this bishop on d6 is that black in general can't take it, because after knight takes, your queen gets into f7. So king here, queen takes. And now you're threatening queen e8, checkmate. Notice this knight's covering the flight squares on the dark squares. If you try and defend that with a move like knight f6, then it's queen e7, checkmate. So there's this like weird thing that black can't really take your bishop, but also you can't take black's right here because of queen c2, c5. So I'm not certain that Anderssen is winning in this position here. And therefore, unfortunately, I suspect there may have been easier, less brilliant ways to win this game, because this is a pretty tricky defense to figure out. So there's three reasons that Kieseritzky lost this game. One, that c6 move, which I don't like, right? Let's go back to that for a second. c6. Ugh, that's not the point of b5. And it just gets him far behind in development, and taking the bishop's not even good, right? The second move that exacerbates his fall is after knight c3, playing bishop c5, looking to maybe trade the dark squared bishop, instead of, which is a key defensive piece. As you've already seen in some of the mating variations we've shown, you can see how white's checkmating black directly on the squares that this bishop is supposed to defend. So here there are more resilient defenses instead of bishop c5. And the final third reason is that in this position here, it's just a calculation thing, right? Bishop g1 was probably a less tough defense than queen a1. Queen a1, if you calculate well, I think the queen a1, queen back to b2 defense, you see that it gives you better chances as black than taking on g1. Much better chances. So he took here. And yeah, in this position, another brilliant move from white was e5, still leaving the rook hanging and just cutting out the defender of the dark square. So it's funny because white's killing black on dark squares. Normally the way you do it is by trading off the pieces that defend the dark squares. But here, white tempts them both into white's first rank to capture rooks, and then cuts them off with e5 and bishop d6. The pieces are both still on the board when black dies on the dark squares. They're just not defending the dark squares. They've been lured away. This is absolutely, oh my gosh, what a move. e5. Black takes this, which doesn't hurt them at this point. Nothing can help or hurt black anymore once they're already dead. You know, it's all the same. But the basic threat from white in this position is to play knight takes g7 check on a dark square that's undefended, king to d8, and then bishop c7 checkmate on a dark square that's only defended by white. So if I play, I don't know, knight c6, developing my knight towards the center to show it, check. Here, checkmate. That's the basic mating pattern. Beautiful, beautiful thing. So after white plays king e2, right? Black takes the second rook with check, king e2. Black played knight a6 to try and defend that checkmate on c7. Yeah, that's a good move, Kieseritzky. It would have been even better 5 moves ago instead of bringing out this bishop to go hunting the rook, right? And now, as it turns out, it's too late, and white has a gorgeous forced checkmate in 3. It's simple and unique and aesthetic all at the same time. You can pause the video and try and find it if you want. The more you work on something, the more likely you are to remember it, for it to stick with you if you've put in work on it. I'm now going to show it, so, you know, pause if you want to try and find a checkmate in 3. It's 3 moves is a lot. So if you find it, like, super bravo to you. And if you don't, that's fine. You'll actually remember this better for having searched for it, even if you don't find the answer. That's the thing. A lot of people think when you're working on chess, it's because you've got to find the answer. And if you don't solve a puzzle or don't find the answer to some question, it means that all the time you spent looking for it was wasted and it was too hard for you and you didn't get anything out of it, all that. But actually, I mean, the searching helps you to remember and understand even if you don't find it. Like, you'll see, oh, I was looking down this path, but there was this is the twist I didn't see. Or it's just incomparable to have actually searched for yourself. Okay? So we start with the knight check. The king gets corralled by the bishop. Has to go this way. Now it has 0 flight squares. Now it's mate in 2. If you didn't find the mate in 3, you can always stop again now and see if you find the mate in 2, right? All right, I'm going to show it. Check. Knight has to take, and this knight was the last dark square defender from a rather, prostrate position. Gets rid of the queen, and now checkmate. I mean, what a position, right? 2 knights and a bishop checkmating that poor king. White's got nothing left. Oh, man. Beautiful. Beautiful. So that's the checkmate. That's the game that has lived in history for so long, right? Very weird moves in the opening. Piece sacrifice from the opening. Then the double rook sacrifice with quiet moves, right? White's giving the rooks with quiet moves. Remember this, right? Right here is just, we take over the dark squares. Step 1 with 2 rooks hanging, right? Black takes one of them. Quiet move with a pawn. Then we shut all your pieces out of the dark squares that we've taken over. It looks quiet. It does threaten checkmate in 2. So it's not like... E5 is not the quietest move ever, but it's still a very fine little pawn move, right? We sack 2 rooks. And then the queen, when it's sort of a clear combination that someone other than Anderssen could have found this final combination, right? But the setup was truly brilliant. And so I hope that no one thinks that anything that I said pointing out some moves that might have been easier or stronger for Anderssen than the moves he played, I hope nobody takes that in the wrong way as me trying to discount his achievements. I hope that we've properly respected and honored Anderssen's genius with how we've looked at this game together today, that he's come up with many moves that we wouldn't have considered, played original, surprising concepts, sacrificed all kinds of amounts of material, and the way in which White starts going after the dark squares in this game from move 8 without even putting all White's pawns on dark squares, right? But getting the 2 knights to light squares where they control dark squares. Letting the bishop take over the board. And then, bishop d6 and e5, capping it off. Is absolutely brilliant. Black gets absolutely stuck with this bad light squared pawn and light squared bishop, blocking in the king from his own flight squares. If there weren't a bishop on c8, the king even wouldn't be checkmated in this final combination, right? If you think of this, if the king just had a flight square on c8, White wouldn't even really be threatening checkmate. It's just b5 to sack the pawn and then leave the bishop on c8 the whole game. Oof. So Bob asks a question which I started talking about a little bit at the very beginning of this video, right? Did Anderssen have color complexes in mind when playing this game? And that I don't know, because I've never read Anderssen's writings on the game. But to some extent, it seems like he does. Like, the game certainly shows that idea very, very clearly, right? At some level, he had some concept of it, but I don't know exactly at what level, right? But to a modern player looking at this game, from the moment we see this knight f5, c6, g4, this moment offering the bishop for the knight, it's already saying, like, wow, Black's going to be hard-pressed to defend the dark squares, right? And this idea that how will Black stop White from establishing a knight on d5 that will control dark squares? Once there's no knight to go to f6, once there's no pawn on c6. In a sense, there's a very, very deep, brilliant understanding move for move from here all the way through the next 10 moves where White is very attuned to the fact that there is this particular group of weak squares. It's fascinating, but I don't think any of us can properly answer what Anderssen had in mind when playing. We don't have a lot of writings and post-game interviews from the players from back then. All right, so brilliant game. Now what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to play through the game a couple times, predicting the moves and checking if you're right or wrong. Okay? I've given the explanations that I can and will give for now. Hopefully they're sufficient that with a few repetitions you can start to get this, right? But basically, here's how you do it. You go e4. He's playing the King's Gambit. You see if you're right. I'm just pressing the forward arrow to see if I'm right, right? Black accepted it. He played the Bishop's Gambit, not the more modern Knight f3 Gambit. Queen h4 check came in, King to f1. Now Black played the b5 counter Gambit thing, Brian counter Gambit, not really used nowadays, b5. He took it. Black developed the knight. He played the very solid defensive e4 with d3. Oh, we got it wrong. Oh, my God. I mean, I got it wrong. You guys didn't. But that would be your reaction as well, right? And then you have to go back and be like, oh, my gosh, I got it wrong. He threw in knight f3 first. Now I remember, because I remember that queen h5 would have hit the bishop. So maybe he was concerned about leaving both things hanging there, right? Although knight c3 would deal with it. But, okay, so now we go back. And we start again, right? That's good I messed it up, in a way. All right, he plays the King's Gambit. I can show you guys how to do it when you mess up, because most of you will mess up once or twice too. If not 20 times, you know, it happens. Okay, so King's Gambit, it's accepted. Bishop's Gambit, Queen h4 check, King f1. The crazy counter Gambit. Now we know that here he doesn't play knight f3, but he takes the pawn. Then after knight f6, he's going to throw in knight f3. The queen goes to h6. Not h5. That was a choice. Sets up there. Now we get the d3 defense of the pawn. Now Black embarks on the craziness of this game. And that's the important thing to know. He doesn't yet go for c6 and taking the bishop. First, knight h5, knight h4. This weird trade of the tactical threat on knight g3. White leaves their pieces hanging. As soon as White has two pieces hanging, Kieseritzky tries out the double attack queen g5. White's going to save the knight. g6 would be super interesting here, but wasn't played. Instead, c6, going after the bishop. Big mistake. And now Anderssen just leaves that bishop there. But what does Anderssen do? He now plays g4, basically the first moment he gets, like this. Right? Taking advantage of the pawn can't take en passant. Plays g4, kicking that knight. When the knight retreats, he now defends his g-pawn, not his bishop. Defends the g-pawn. Bishop gets taken. He's going to play h4, h5 before queen f3. Now queen f3, looking for bishop f4. The knight has to get out of the way of the trapped queen on g5. Only square is back to g8. Ugh. Bishop f4. Queen f6. Knight c3. Threatening knight d5, but we're going to get this bad move, bishop c5. White's going to come forward with knight d5 undeterred by hanging rooks, or perhaps even encouraged by hanging rooks. Queen b2. And now going after the dark squares with bishop d6, leaving all the rooks hanging and starting to cut off squares from the king. Now, bishop takes rook is going to be played in the game. And you can remember that queen takes rook check, king e2, queen b2 might have been a better defense. Actually leaving the queen to stick around and defend through c2 as well. Black took this rook. Now White seals the deal with e5. Oof. Black takes the final rook because it doesn't matter anymore. King comes up. Knight a6 to stop bishop c7 checkmate. Knight g7, king d8, queen f6, knight f6, and mate on e7. There you go. Things you can do, like with any game that you want to memorize. You can play through it every now and then. You can play through it 2 or 3 times today to see if you know it, and then you can wait 2 days and see if you remember it then. You can go show it to somebody else. You could try to explain it to somebody. You could say, hey, let me show you this amazing game. And if you forget a move, you know, you could have it handy to help yourself out. You don't need to nail it for this to be worthwhile, right? You can have the score around somewhere near you. Bring it out and show it. And that will help you to remember it, to have to explain it to others, to show it to others, to repeat it a few times. All right. Good luck with all your further work. I am sorry that this video was an hour instead of half. But, hey, we had to do true justice to a monumental game. And the more I blabber on about the game, the more likely you are to remember it. So, good luck in all your studies. Bye.